Desso. Hello, I'm TD Desso,
And I'm Ed Spears.
and welcome to the Connecting Theology podcast brought to you from Fishbowl Studios. Thank you so much for being here with us this Saturday for our podcast, for our eighth episode. The Warren Theological Foundation, we are here to disseminate scholarly content from Christian studies and religious studies. Subscribe at WarrenTheology.org. Our sponsors and partners, thank you to Dallas Bible Theological Institute, the Urban Christian Writers Guild, and the West Mount Moriah Baptist Church and the Bread of Life Baptist Church of Fort Worth, Texas. If you want to submit journal articles to our journal, the Warren Journal of Theology, you can go to our website at WarrenTheology.org. If you want to donate, you can also donate at our website or our CashApp, $Warren Theology. Now, I want to introduce our guest. She is a good friend of mine, Dr. Mary Peterson, who is an educator. And today, our title for today's show is A Jesus Model of Servant Leadership in Education. Our primary question is, Jesus was a teacher. How can this truth revolutionize the teaching profession? So we're so glad to have Dr. Mary Peterson here with us. I want to tell you just a little bit about her. She's a highly educated person. She graduated from Southwestern Adventist University with a Bachelor of Arts in English with a minor in religion. Graduated with a Master's of Administration in Education, and in 2016 successfully defended her dissertation from Lamar University. She earned a doctorate in higher education leadership with emphasis in DEI. What does DEI stand for?
First of all, let me just say thank you so much for inviting me and giving me this opportunity, this platform to share my research and my experience under servant leadership. Mm-hmm. DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion, which the state is trying to get rid of,
Okay, the state of
Texas.
Yeah,
the state of Texas and many institutions, higher ed institutions.
Okay, thank you. And she has 20 years of experience in education, various roles. She's currently serving as an independent contractor in educational consultancy. So, thank you, Dr. Peterson, for being here. I'm so excited about this discussion that we're preparing to have. So, let's jump right into it. So, give us in-depth insight into your research, particularly related to a Christ-like model of servant leadership in education. And what was the context of your research, and what were some of your findings?
Okay, so when I started at Lamar University, you kind of had to enter with a topic already or a problem that you wanted to research and your mode of leadership that you want to apply. Mm-hmm. And initially, everyone was going for transformative leadership. It was very popular during that time, as well as the situational leader in pragmatic and other leadership types. I chose servant leadership after a long process of looking at different leadership styles that I personally had experienced that were not, to me, supportive and was causing burnout for me as an educator, as a classroom teacher. And I thought about what ways I would like to be supported and what would I want my principal to be like? What qualities would I maybe be able to thrive as an educator under that particular leadership? And that is when I stumbled upon the servant leadership style. Now, I'm a Christian. I've been in the church for many years, and you would think, well, that's obvious that you would choose servant leadership. And the church doesn't teach, well, when I say the church, I mean in the Christian realm. The topic of servant leadership just didn't come up as maybe it does in some other organizations, but I actually found it not through the church, even though we understand Christ had a servant leadership style. That servant leadership concept was actually theorized by Robert K. Greenleaf and added into the canons of literature. He actually was a Christian Quaker, a Quaker Christian, whichever way, and he began his career in corporate, but he wanted to apply a more ethical style of leadership. So with that, I decided to investigate then servant leadership, and if I could find servant leaders, those principles practicing the servant leadership style. And that is when I decided to focus on only schools where that would be applied. And I understood from my own religious background as a Seventh-day Adventist that servant leadership style is practiced in all of our academies and elementary schools. And with that, I then undertook a investigation to see what the phenomenal case was for servant leadership and identify those qualities that teachers felt that made them more successful and where they had greater job satisfaction.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. So there's, you said that many people in your cohort or that you came across chose to focus in, you said transitional leadership.
Transformational.
Thank you. So I'm guessing there are not a lot of people who are focusing in servant leadership as you.
That is correct. I was the only one to sign up for servant leadership. You had like maybe 20 people want to do transformational, and then so many people want to do situational and motivational. But then I thought, well, I'm just going to do servant leadership because as a Christian, I wanted to understand that application and what it looks like and what it feels like in my practice as a classroom teacher.
So can I ask a question?
Yes.
And Desso's always, when you invite me, it's always fun to know which way Ed's going to go. So I'm a pastor, and I've grown up in the Church of God in Christ. And so something you said earlier caught my attention. I have always seen servant leadership practice and hierarchical leadership. So I'm curious, as you're looking at your dissertation and your process here, you mentioned that you did not see that as frequently within your religious foundings. And for us, it was always that scripture of he that is greatest among you, let him serve.
Right.
And so that was always the foundation. I mean, in our tradition, if you need the bathroom clean and nobody's there, the pastor cleans the bathroom, and we lead by service. And so I'm curious, in your initial statement there, where did you not see that, and where did you see it in that? Because you had to have some experience to have a desire for servant leadership to be a basis there.
Right. Well, in the beginning, I was practicing as a Baptist, and the concept of servant leadership or that terminology was not used. I'll just, for clarification. And the same as now practicing Adventism, the actual coined terminology servant leadership is understood. So it's not always, oh, I'm a servant leader, like it's not in the forefront of speech, but there's an understanding that is the type of leadership because we're Christ-like. We want to be Christ followers. And if that's the leadership style Christ practice, then that's what we should practice as Christians.
Excellent. Okay.
So thanks for that question because it kind of clarifies.
And what you're doing in your research is you're saying that we should practice that in all facets of life, not just in church life.
That's correct.
But in education as well.
Absolutely. And I know that it can be practiced outside of parochial schools and in secular institutions because I practiced that as a classroom teacher as I conducted my research. The teachers I interviewed for my case study, however, worked in a parochial setting, and it had to be a parochial setting based on the type of servant leadership their principals practice. So I had to identify campuses where that leadership was practiced. For
Okay.
example, I would not go to a secular school and assume servant leadership. So with that, that's how I basically was able to select my research study,
Okay.
my research group.
Okay.
So I'll go on to the next question because there's so much there, and I want to keep
Well, no,
us
no,
on
please
track.
do. Please, no, please do.
Well, no, only because I spent several years in the public school setting, and one of the first times I actually saw a standardized book study on servant leader was in the public school setting, where it was actually a superintendent study and so on. So that was just an interesting there, and I was wondering kind of when you said you looked at your schools and you looked for those particular areas, what was a deciding characteristic? Was it something within their mission statement, something within their vision statement? How did you distinguish? Because just as you mentioned earlier, that, you know, within your faith experience, different faith cultures had different contexts of servant leaders. Even within the parochial school settings, there are very different styles of leadership, even within and I had to I did some design work for an Adventist school in New Orleans, so I had a little experience with them as well. So each school has some differences, but they have, I was wondering, how did you define, because it's not so much a generic, every Adventist school is definitely this, every Catholic school is definitely this. So what was the characteristic of the school that made you say these are going to be good candidates that have the basis of servant leadership that I would want to dig deeper into?
Excellent question. With our church, it is very organized, okay, and the mission of our church and our schools, it was actually inspired. And so with that, the practice in education, the practice in church leadership, the practice in various other aspects, even our higher education institutions, no matter where you go in the world, you will find the consistency of the philosophy of our education, and part of that is the servant leadership style. Our principals are encouraged to apply the Christ-like application of leadership. And so with that, that is how I was able to decide that these particular campuses, because also they were close to home and I didn't have to drive so far, I was able to have access to these campuses and meet with the teachers.
No, I love that, and I thank you for clarifying that, because what you shared was the deliberateness of the corporate experience of the denominational school. So that way, it was something that was expected and clarified
Definitely
as a need.
expectation.
I love it. So one of the things that was brought out is that part of your work is around the servant as leader by Robert Greenleaf. And so can you give us a little bit about the primary arguments from that essay, and what was your analysis and conclusion based on the work?
Sure. Well, Robert Greenleaf, as I stated earlier, he began his career in corporate America, working with AT&T. And as he was matriculating through his field, he discovered a different type of leadership that was not as beneficial for him personally. And so he went back to his faith. But before I even talk about him going back to his faith, there was actually a novel, or a short story that he read by Herman Hesse called The Journey East. And in that particular narrative, it talks about a young man who was a crew member, but he was actually a servant on the ship. And as they're trying to find this voyage, a route to the east, shortcut, some of the crew members become ill, are discouraged, even including the captain and officers. But this servant had such a positive attitude. He was always cheerful and on the optimistic side. And he did all he could to influence their own morale and their own encouragement. And so the story goes that that servant actually became leader, which we know is paradoxical anyhow. And it's kind of hard for some people to apply this type of leadership because it is such a paradox, right? So he identified in this servant, crew member, these leadership qualities. You can see that he doesn't seem like the leader because he doesn't have the title.
Right.
He doesn't have the credentials, but he has the influence. And he uses it in a very altruistic way. He's not selfish. He's not trying to gain anything from the people he's serving, but he wants them to feel encouraged to do better, be better, so that they can survive this mission. Now, I will go back to Robert Greenleaf also as a Quaker Christian that I mentioned earlier. This he applied with the example of Christ as a servant leader. He did not come to be leader, to just take over and run things. He came to serve, okay? And in serving, part of that was giving up his life. And so with Christ's service, he also showed his leadership.
Yes.
We see this in many examples in his in the stories of Christ and in what the apostles share about how he humbled himself. And humbling himself, he was able to help people find and identify who they were and to make them understand their worth and importance. And so, I don't know, I probably went off track answering your question.
That was really good. And you bring up an interesting point. Now, I'd hope you'd elaborate a little bit on this, because this is when you said it's paradoxical, but it's actually very necessary in the understanding of leadership. You bring up the idea, there's those 5 sources of leadership with positional and all those other pieces. You bring up this very clear and necessary idea that leadership is not necessarily positional, but it is relational. And so can you, based on that story, which is wonderful, kind of elaborate a little bit on how you see that playing out in the role of servant leaders, how, again, one, it's not a positional role. So even though we're studying people in leadership's role, but leadership is definitely in every level of organization, how are you seeing that play out in these examples where it is non-positional but still very evident, and where do you see that becoming the real root of leadership versus the authoritarian positional leadership?
Okay, so with positional, it's evident that this is the person who is in charge, air quotes. But then with those who are able to influence a group of people within that same organization, sometimes better than the positional leader, that's called the referent leader. So with that referent leader, then if they're able to uplift these individuals that they're working with and not want to steal the shine, as they say, but give them the shine, give them the resources, the support that they need so that they could stand out. And that is really important, because a servant leader is not wanting to take all the credit. They're not wanting all the shine, all the glory. They want the individual to become what they have the potential to be. And later, I think we'll talk about this. They have to have foresight and vision. And a servant leader does have that vision, and sometimes greater vision and foresight than the positional leader. And that's what makes them stand out to the individuals who may also be at the same level they're in.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
I love that.
in the
I love
context of public education, the teacher, for example, lacks a lot of formal authority in the classroom.
No, we know it.
So, and actually, we were planning on talking about that as well later. That there's a lot of bureaucracy, and so, much of it necessary, by the way, that hinders the profession of teaching, and a lot of the power that a teacher has in the classroom is going to have to be by way of that influence, opposed to like a formal authority that's been given. Yeah. Greenleaf, in his essay, particularly, he talks about prophecy in the modern context. And while I was reading through his essay, and thank you for highlighting that, how he was motivated by that old story. But he delved into prophecy. Can you explain that more? Of what did he mean by prophecy in the modern context, and how was that relevant to his primary argument?
Okay, so the way that I conceptualize his context is that in the modern society that we're in, Robert Greenleaf lived a long time. He didn't pass until 1990, and he brought out his research in 1977. So he had a long time to establish it, even creating a center for servant leadership that was applied ethics based. But he is talking in the sense of how do you operate in this dual loyalty of the individual and society. Okay, because everyone does not believe the same way. And as you said earlier, servant leadership can be practiced in the secular realm. And it may not even be Christ-focused when they do it.
This is true.
And this is what I'm talking about, because everyone can have different beliefs, but everyone can have a core value. And in Robert Greenleaf promoting modern-day prophets in this sense that we have to get this concept of leadership out, not just in the parochial fields, but in the secular as well. And how do we do that? Well, you have to focus on the value of it, and not so much on the context of religion. And so, and that's important.
The value of
but
servant
the
leadership
value
itself.
of servant leadership itself as an ethical means, as a way of uplifting not just the individual but the society, and that is that dual loyalty. Where you have that commitment to that individual, but the greater group, and the more you widen the group, it's not necessarily you're just going to catch all Christians, but you're going to catch everybody. It can encompass many people, many types of organizations, and in order for his theory of servant leadership to continue to propagate, you have to find a means as a modern day prophet of that leadership, if you will, by connecting the value base.
So, according to Greenleaf, servant leadership is a prophetic act itself.
That is correct. So that is having the vision and the foresight to anticipate what is needed. What does the individual need? And making sure that you are able to supply what those needs are, and seeing in the future as to what will best benefit this individual. What will they need? Do they need a deeper understanding of the mission, the purpose of their work? Do they need more support, more time? There's a variety of things that could be needed, but having the capacity to see what is needed.
Okay.
But I think that goes to your prophetic statement, because the idea, one, that Christianity is for Christians only is fallible. That is a horrible misunderstanding. And the idea that, as you mentioned before, this theory is, if it is a truth, then it extends beyond those that comprehend the truth. So if it is a true concept, whether they understand it or not, if you can help them see the value of it, they can adopt the parts they can digest, and hopefully it converts or whatnot at another time. I love how you brought that out, and I wanted to give you a bit of kudo on. I love the way you define the prophetic side of it, because we often misunderstand prophetic as only in the announcing of God's desire or direction in this really holistic, part the skies and this is what God says. But if we see the value, if God gives us the discernment to see the need and to be able to speak on the behalf of and to speak to the need, that is phenomenal. So I really wish we had more time to deepen into that. But I know we only have so much time, but oh man, this could go like for 2 hours. But anyway, next, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say.
I could feel it. I was like, that was such a rich statement. I'm like, I want you to bring out what it means to speak prophetically on behalf of another.
But this whole idea of the modern prophecy or prophets practicing this type of leadership is setting up for a radical type of service.
Yes.
Because if you think about how society is kind of driven now. I mean, I don't have the research on it, but I have eyes and ears, and it seems very self-focused, especially in social media. It's all the flashes, the pictures, the selfies, and with this concept, it takes a person outside of themselves. If you're really going to practice this type of leadership, you have to be prepared. You have to be set up in a way where you're willing to take the back seat, where you're willing to, if there is some glory or award, that even though you may have caused it, you don't stand up and accept it, but you push the person out to accept it. This is a radical type of service and leadership. It truly is.
Well, it is, but
it's understated.
Well, but I would also say it's extremely biblical, because when you really understand what you're bringing out, the understanding of bearing one another's burdens, that's what you're talking about. The idea that my self-value is attached to my communal value and my community's value. And even when you get to the point of Paul, when he, they say, you must be a God. He's like, no, I'm not a God. I want you to point you to the right God. And really having this idea of understanding your purpose is to elevate the purpose of God in others. Is a very different approach than the secular approach of it is about self-promotion and gain. And even when Christ is talking about the idea of servant and leader, he talks before that, he says about, I don't want you to exercise power like the world does. I want you to exercise power as in the ability to support and to bring forth the vision of another. Primarily God, but God also in others. So I love that.
And the situation in which he said that in John 13, he had just washed his disciples' feet. And, what do you do? And this is a very practical, applicable point, that what do you do when you are the most powerful person in the room? Jesus, the teacher, was the most powerful person in that room, and he washed his disciples' feet. Which goes back to what we were talking about positional, what was the term? Positional power? Or
and referent power.
Yes. There are different forms. And sometimes we do focus so much on the positional, But anyways, and before we move on.
See, I was trying to stick to it, but I love it.
There was one more point that I wanted to make about, because we may have some people in the audience listening who are very strict about that word prophet. And I do need to clarify.
Please.
There are places in Scripture where even Paul uses that word loosely in one particular context in the book of Titus, where he's talking about the people on the island of Crete, and he says even one of their own prophets. And he was not talking about a Christian. He was not referring to a Christian writer. He was referring to a Greek teacher. So there are places even in Scripture where that term prophet is used loosely, not in reference strictly to Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, so on and so forth.
But I think we have to also deepen the understanding of the audience in that, if you go back even to the Old Testament where they said even Saul prophesied, you don't have to be the title of prophet.
Saul was not a holy
Definitely
person.
Not. No.
I see it as a forerunner, a forebearer.
There you go. One who speaks a truth. And you may have a prophetic moment without being a titled prophet. And we all have responsibility to speak that which God has given us for that moment, for the guidance of another. So if you are speaking in the Spirit, by the Spirit works in a prophetic manner. And that's just the nature. But again,
let's move on.
We only have so much time, because I can look. That's so you and I, we will. I like to poke you anyway. So, but the next question. The next question was the servant leader style of Jesus by Dale Roach. What is Roach's primary argument in this book, and what is your analysis of his conclusion?
That you can't truly have leadership without service, without being a servant. And I think that pretty much sums up his argument as to servant leadership. If you're a leader, you're serving, bottom line. And not only just serving, doing those, some people may think of servant or service as menial tasks, but they go beyond that. Being a servant is working in the undercurrent to push up the individual And that could be anything from helping them understand their purpose and helping them understand their mission and building up those potentials they see in the individual. That is where that foreseer is there, because you understand what is needed for that individual to succeed.
And I'm so glad you said that, because
I love that.
even, in my experience in education, once you've taught for a number of years, you see the patterns of, in the context of education, you see patterns of seniors from 5 years prior. And the seniors who are in front of you now, you can tell them, because you know what's up ahead.
Yes.
You know that anyone who has, who is missing this many credits only a month away from graduation, the chances of them graduating are 15%. So you know that those who do barely graduate without any skills, maybe they graduated 5 years ago, but you see where they are in life now.
Yeah.
So the ones who are sitting in front of you, because of your experience, you are able to educate them in a better way. You're able to know what their needs are because you've had these prior experiences. Just
Right.
piggybacking off what you said about how there is something prophetic about teaching. You know what's up ahead.
Yes.
Even though this young person who thinks he or she knows it all,
Right.
because at 17, of course, you know everything,
I do.
and and of course, I'm applying these principles to a high school teacher. But in a sense, the teacher knows what's up ahead.
But Desso, that also speaks to one of your areas, because when we get into the idea of DEI, and we misunderstand that completely, and I want to spend our time on that. But I know there's 3 hours right there, but the idea of the equity part of it and what you're saying is truly an example of how equity should be applied, because if the teacher is seeing the need of each student individually, not as the class completely, they're able to see that prophetically and speak to and address each individual need as needed. And even when you look at Christ's example, he didn't deal with all of his disciples the same.
True.
That is the point that I was going to make.
I could feel it in my
Go ahead and
spirit.
make it. Go ahead
With
and make
Del
it.
Speak, sister,
Roach,
speak.
with Del Roach, he didn't want. It's not a homogenized application of the
on.
style.
Bring it out.
Because you have individuals, and when you were saying earlier, Desso, about having this classroom full of seniors, you can't do one application that fits all, and that is what makes a servant leader very. I mean, skillful in addressing what people need.
But then that also requires that the leader knows them individually.
Exactly.
And that goes back to Jesus.
Yes.
I mean, how he knew his disciples. And then in John chapter 10, he talks about the shepherd, or the sheep know the shepherd's voice. There is an individualized lesson that the teacher has for each of his students.
Most definitely.
Yes.
You know.
Which is
Yeah,
why he
and
knew
Christ
that
was
one
for
was
all
missing.
the people.
Right. He wouldn't have known that the one was missing from the 100
Unless
if
he
was
knew
only focused on the 99.
unless he knew each one.
And
Yeah.
he knew which one he
one.
needed to go after.
Yes.
I love what you bring out here, and I would also add to what you've added. There's two different concepts you've kind of brought up. One in the secular business field, but also within the education field. And I'll stick it to the educational side. I think you're also clarifying the distinction between a teacher and an educator. And there's because teacher is positional, educator is calling. And so when you see the difference, teacher is one that follows the steps to teach. I have met the rubric and I have taught the material.
Whatever the state
Whatever the
requirements are.
requirement is. But an educator takes a personal relationship, and they're not done until a learning has happened. And you can't do a learning until you've done an assessment. You can't do an assessment without an attachment. You can't have an attachment without a relationship. And those things provide for an educator, which is what you're describing in this format, and understanding that the principal, when you go back to school theory,
Yes.
is also supposed to be the chief educator, not just chief administrator.
Right.
And that brings a whole different context to the idea that the principal is called to educate and be in that same educator relationship with faculty and students. So how do you pull all that in? Because I'm
But
having too much
sometimes
fun.
I think there's a misapplication of
Bring it.
principle and leadership because, I think maybe sometimes principals forget what their purpose, calling, and duty is. I've even asked some principals when I'm under their leadership, what is the mission? Like, what are we doing here? What vision do you have? Because it's hard to follow if it looks haphazard and then I don't know what the vision is. And we all know that servant leaders are always going to be able to promote the vision because they understand the mission, you know?
Yeah.
And so with that, I appreciate what you said about that because it's true. When you have a principal who is, maybe they want to be a principal because of the title and the money,
Which happens.
and the money, and because they get to run the school. Well, if you have the concept of running the school and it's all on you, then definitely that is not a servant leadership approach.
Yes.
And that may be more of a pragmatic approach
theory
because we're focused on benchmarks and targets and teacher, I need to see this and that and the other when I come to your class. If I don't see it, then check, you know? And so that is part of the reason why I went to the servant leadership side because it has to be more personal and more a deeper connection with the faculty, the students, the community even.
Okay. And for the last 8 minutes, let's move into
I won't be
that.
invited back.
No, yes, you will. So let's move into that. And by the way, I'm sorry, audience. A few weeks ago, we had one of our editors to join us. And we did promise you that as we go along, we want to bring in other people from the Warren team. And Edward Spears is one of the people on the Warren team. He is a board of on the board of directors, and he's also one of our editors for the Warren Journal Theology. So I want to thank him for being here, and he brings a lot to the table. Now, Dr. Peterson, there were two works that you recommended. We just talked about those. One work was The Servant as Leader, an essay by Robert K. Greenleaf. Very influential, obviously. And then a book, The Servant Leadership Style of Jesus by Del Roach. So thank you for bringing our attention to those. And if you want to know more about this topic, those are two. Dr. Peterson recommends those two works to read. Now, do you think, let's move into the nitty-gritty part, okay? Do you think that the system or bureaucracy of public education makes it difficult for teachers to implement a Christ-like servant leadership approach?
Not completely, because as we were saying, if it's applicable in the outside of church and outside of parochial school settings, it's definitely something that can be practiced within the secular setting. And one of the elements is kindness. It's just that simple. And building relationship. And when you're building relationship and you're getting to understand your student or your teacher and what their needs are, then you're beginning to identify areas of needs where you can serve them.
Okay. Well,
I don't know if that's...
Well, no, yeah.
Okay.
Here's where, like, I'll give you an example. I had a coach to tell me, and he had, coached for decades, that there used to be a time when he was able to work with his student athletes year round. But a law was passed stating that coaches could only work with their student athletes during the season. And he was sharing with me of how that limited the mentoring that he was able to do, because he taught at a school he served at a school, inner city school that, impoverished, and those kids need guidance beyond just football season. So he felt that was a systemic hindrance on because I think this person I'm thinking of that I had this conversation with, he definitely has that servant leadership mindset. But that was just one example. He was telling me he felt limited in how he could connect with his students.
Well, two things. One, it is a limitation if you allow the limitation, because okay, I can't go about it this route using the school's funding and whatever federal monies, but I can always develop my own program in community with the school, where I have a summer program now where they can come.
Do you want to promote that?
Where they can come. I just think that, what would you say, barriers? I think barriers are there if you don't break through them. It'll continue to be a barrier. For example, you can't say, okay, everybody bow your head, we're going to pray now in class, not in a secular setting. But that doesn't mean you can't stop and say, okay, everyone, we're going to take a moment of silence.
That's right.
And you
And
could
use it
do
how you
whatever
choose.
you want during this time, as long as you're not disturbing anyone and you're quiet. I actually saw a teacher once practice meditation with the students. It wasn't necessarily religious, but wanted them to learn. And this is the
Center,
way he did it. He wanted them to be able to learn how to center themselves and teach them steps to come down from anxiety, because they had test anxiety.
Yes.
So there's always ways.
Well,
Okay.
I love what you brought. Oh, okay, we're getting close.
How long we got?
8 minutes.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's plenty of time. That's
So
plenty of time.
I love what you just said, because I think we have to understand that barriers are opportunities if we understand the grace of what we're operating in.
Problem-solving opportunities.
Exactly. And what I think for many people within the faith have this very narrow, limited experience. Like, oh, they took prayer out of schools. As long as I'm in school, there's never prayer out of school, because I'm praying wherever I am.
Yes.
So even though there may not be a formal process, there is still a prophetic way of doing these things. And I think part of what we miss is where God has given us the opportunity to grow through these challenges that seem structural. But if you think about Christ's ministry, Christ did not change the society around him. He didn't come in and vote everyone out. He didn't come in, and he was able to adapt within this very bureaucratic religious world, bureaucratic secular world. And he taught his disciples how to adapt. He said, well, feed these people. We only have... No, don't send them away. Don't look at that barrier. This is an opportunity to grow.
Yeah,
And so
and this is a pet peeve of mine, the way many Christians think, that there are many institutions besides the church. And let me see how to say this. The Christian should not allow, or the Christian should not depend on other institutions in order for us to be a Christian.
I love that.
And I guess to clarify, what I mean by that is, I am a citizen of the United States, for example. The United States is a separate entity from the church. The United States does not help me to be a better Christian. And I should stop trying. If the government is formed in a way where it is, beneficial to me as a Christian, okay, good. But if not, I should. The disciples, the first church, or the first century church, politically they had everything working against them, but they were not waiting for laws to be changed in order for them to do what Christ had told them to do.
So it sounds like you answered your question.
Yes.
Then can servant leadership be practiced in the secular sense? Yes, because you can engage in mission, vision,
All of it.
listening, like
And like you
being
said, kindness, too.
Yes,
Yeah.
being empathetic and supporting people where you see there is a lack, so that they can be successful.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we got one more question. This is the most
Oh,
important question.
okay.
This last question is the most important question.
So there was a thought, the Son of God was a teacher. How can this truth revolutionize the teacher profession? I think you've hit on some of that, but elaborate.
Yeah, but let's close and let's close.
You
with-
know, and I thought about this, and that goes back to saying, just because, almost what you just said about we're in the United States, but and there's some laws that guarantee some religious freedoms or whatever, but that doesn't make me or help me be a better Christian. Right. I think about God as teacher. Now, don't want to sound secular, okay? Okay, I don't want to start writing you guys, but God is a value that many people have, okay? Not just Christians, right?
No, the concept.
And the concept of God. If I apply the knowledge or the concept that God is a teacher, the God of creation, God of everything, God who made me, humbled themselves, whatever God, and became that way, then what am I to do? What am I called to do? And to be great at it. So regardless of your religious background, if you see God as a teacher, that is a value, that is a truth that can help revolutionize this whole concept of servant leadership.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Matthew chapter 11, beginning at verse 28, Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke and learn from me." Jesus invited people to be his disciples, not just to receive salvation.
Right.
Learning is so foundational to the Christian faith. Especially in the Old Testament, it talks about, the Word of God. Reading was so important to the Jewish community, because if they couldn't read, for example, then they could not know what God's Word said. So learning is so foundational.
But Desso, I've got to push on that just a little
Please
bit.
do.
And I couldn't go without confronting him at least once. And I agree with you, as I always start off. I agree with you mostly on this. But here's what I love about what you shared and what I think you're bringing into this. I think the bigger assignment for us as believers is what Moses tells them, to tell what you have learned. What I think we miss is we tell what we have learned, not through what we write, but through what we do. And as a servant leader, I'm teaching you by serving you. And whether you know what I'm trying to teach you or not, your experiential knowledge will grow because of what you've experienced in me. And that way, even those that I know have positional authority with, those that I don't have authoritative rights with, but if I have shown you love, you now know that love exists. You may not know how to love, but you know that love exists. And if we take this servant approach, we're actually teaching them our life as a lesson. And then they can begin to adapt that. And so I think if we really get to this idea of what Christianity is about, discipleship is not just about formal teaching. Discipleship is serving in a way that brings understanding. And if they get understanding, they'll begin to grasp Christ.
And that was a point I was going to make. After Christ ascends, they don't stop learning.
That's right.
They don't stop teaching.
Yes.
Because it is
It's a part of the Great Commission.
Yes.
Yes, teaching them to observe everything that I've commanded you.
And then they go and they continue, so it proliferates that
and
way.
they learn it by observing
That's right.
the things that
They
you do.
experience it.
Yes.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Peterson, for joining us for this discussion.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Elder Spears. It has been a wonderful discussion today. And to our audience, thank you so much for watching and or listening. We want to say a special thank you to our donors and our sponsors, the Dallas Bible Theological Institute, the Urban Christian Writers Guild, the West Mount Moriah Baptist Church, and the Bread of Life Baptist Church of Fort Worth, Texas. Also, we're calling for papers. For our journal, we're always on the lookout for scholarly content. If you are a writer in the areas of theology or religious studies, you're welcome to contribute to our journal. Submit papers at our website, WarrenTheology.org. And until then, thank you for joining us, and blessings.